Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on high performance computing. Today, my guest is from Strategic Blue. We have James Mitchell, who's coming to us from the UK. He is the CEO and founder of Strategic Blue. Welcome to the show, James.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's really a pleasure to have you on the show today. And I thought we'd start out with your slide deck. I have them up on my screen. So why don't we start with that?
Great. Okay. Well, my company is Strategic Blue. There's a team of 6 of us based out of the UK, but we travel fairly globally. And our raison d'etre is to bring the risk management tools and services from the commodities markets and to start applying that to cloud computing. So if we move on to the next slide. The long-term proposition is basically the hedging of IT price risk. I mean, if you talk to your company's CFO, you know, he's routinely used to hedging his interest rates, his foreign exchange, oil price, electricity, coal. I mean, he's even able to hedge his weather risk, for goodness sake, but he's not able to hedge the cost of his IT. And so in order to deal with that, the standard practice is to take your forecast of what you think you're going to use, multiply that by 20%, 100%, 300%. We've even heard of some people buying 20 times what they think they might use just in case. And all of that is incurred as CapEx cost. And so imagine if instead of doing that, you were able to go to a market maker and say, well, I basically forecast this, and I think, you know, it might go up as high as this, or it might be as low as this. And then you're actually able to lock in the cost of what you're expecting. And maybe you might even buy some options to buy a little bit more at a fixed price, or some options to sell a little bit back at a fixed price. We're basically able to manage your position, and every 3 or 6 months you would re-hedge it. You could actually hit your IT budget without having to massively overspend on CapEx. And this would dramatically reduce your IT costs. And the knock-on effect of that is that you dramatically reduce your carbon footprint. So, you know, our company is all about working out how to get from where we are at the moment, where there isn't really any kind of a traded market in cloud computing, to a world where this is possible. So in order to do this, we've basically worked out a series of baby steps to get from where we are now to this long-term vision. And one of those steps is basically to take over the billing from cloud providers. So the great thing about clouds is that it's already a utility service. It is provided remotely from, you know, a large central location, and, you know, transmitted to you over the telecoms cables. We don't want to interfere technically in any way, and you'll find that market makers in other markets such as electricity, you know, they're operating on a purely financial basis. So again, in this role, we will basically take over the billing from the cloud provider, but leave the technical delivery of the service going directly to the cloud user. And at least in the short term, the SLA would also continue to be directly with the cloud user. So nothing changes technically. And if they're using management software, a RightScale, a Univer, or whether they use the web interface, or whether they use the command line interface, all of that remains unchanged. They just receive an invoice from Strategic Blue instead of from one or more cloud providers, so you can get multi-cloud billing under a single invoice. And by stepping into that billing chain, we're able to buy from the cloud providers under terms that suit them, which often have preferential terms because we're buying on behalf of a portfolio that will be larger than the buying power of any one single user. And then we're turning around to the cloud user and we're selling to them on terms that suit them. And those terms may well be completely different to those typically offered by the cloud provider, because there's a difference in preference. And the difference between those two basically requires financing. We find that the cloud providers will offer better pricing if you pay up front. The cloud users are often prepared to make a long-term commitment to use something, but don't want to pay all of that money up front. So if we are prepared to finance the difference between those two preferences, then we're able to share some of the discounts with one, or in fact between several users. We're able to timeshare these long-term commitments, into basically projects that go one after the other, and put those together and make that commitment to the cloud provider. So moving on to the next slide, entitled Current Proposition. At the moment, we're able to do this with three cloud providers. That's Amazon Web Services, Cloud Sigma, and the Giant Cloud. And we're in discussions with 4, maybe 5 other clouds to also add those. Those clouds have overlapping skill sets. So if you were to draw a Venn diagram in terms of what they're able to do, then there's a fair amount of overlap. But there are certain applications that each of those clouds is uniquely well suited for. And we're able to go to a cloud user, understand their general use case or use cases, suggest, I hesitate before saying recommend, but suggest that particular cloud providers would be worth looking at and trialing. And once the cloud user has settled on one or more cloud providers, we're then able to consolidate all of that billing under a single invoice, wherever they fit in with purchase orders. We'll basically ask the cloud user, what terms do you actually want? When do you want to pay for this? Do you want it to be the same amount every month? Do you want to be billed for exactly what you use? How do you want this to work? And then we'll then compare that with what we need to do on the cloud provider side in terms of us. I would view this as hedging that. And then we're even able to do things like adding in the cost of software that might be priced based off the amount of cloud usage. We're able to add in the cost of cloud management software as well. And because we're a neutral party and we really don't mind which cloud provider gets used, we don't mind what software gets used, we just want to do the billing, and we just want to pay people on one side and collect an invoice on the other, and finance the difference in the cash flows. And we're finding that is quite a compelling proposition. We're also working with a lot of partners, systems integrators, telecoms companies who already have a valued relationship with the customers. And what we're able to do, moving on to the next slide, is we're able to enable them to do everything that we do, which is primarily just making it cheaper and removing some of the annoyances and suboptimalities of the invoicing process. We're able to enable them to do all of that, and we will actually give them the full benefits that they would have been able to get from their entire portfolio of cloud users approaching each of the clouds directly, because that puts us in the position where we're able to drive volumes, and we're also uniquely positioned to be able to allow the different providers, the different value-added resellers and channel partners to trade with one another, because we're basically the single conduits to the various clouds, and we can arrange a timeshare from, for argument's sake, a telecoms end user customer with another project from a cloud user of a systems integrator, put the two together, and between them, that then provides the justification for us reserving some capacity with the relevant cloud provider. And all of this is still with the technical service going directly from each of the clouds right through to the cloud user. So there really is no technical interference as a result of what we're proposing here. And then moving on to our last slide, we seem to fit quite neatly into Gartner's view of the world, and Gartner has been talking a lot about cloud brokerages, and Forrester is saying similar things. Gartner says that 20% of all cloud purchases will be made for Cloud Services Brokerage by 2015. That's pretty soon now. And I guess what we would emphasize is we seem to be unique in the market at the moment in terms of purely looking at this from a financial perspective and not trying to add on any kind of technical interface in terms of providing technical access to different clouds. We're quite happy to let the technical guys work on that because that's their core expertise. Our core expertise, which actually fits in beautifully alongside the technical solutions, is providing the financing and the hedging and the forecasting, basically that's our proposition. That's the end of my presentation, Rich.
Well, thank you, James. A couple questions. You make it sound like if somebody's processing this week, they might be on Cloud Sigma, and next week on something else. Would it vary like that? I mean, would they see something different in this model when they
There are certain applications where you can do that, and that's certainly very enticing. I mean, there are definitely data constraints associated with doing that. I mean, if you have an application that uses a very small amount of data but an awful lot of processing, so Monte Carlo simulations would be a good example of that. If a customer is able to set themselves up both on Amazon and on Cloud Sigma and maybe on various other clouds, then we can actually direct them in advance, and this might even be several months in advance, as to which one we want them to use in order to get them to fill in essentially a timeshare so that we're going to Amazon with like blocks of continuous usage, albeit from different parties, and going to Cloud Sigma likewise. And that's good for the customer in terms of they'll get a cheaper price. It's good for us because we're intermediating this and taking some money out from doing that. And it's good for the cloud providers because the ideal for them is for them to have an upfront commitment for a long-term amount of usage for a fixed amount, which matches beautifully with them going out and buying equipment and building in data centers, which are nice long-term blocks of usage being used over time. And so if we're able to move stuff around like that, then that's great. Um, but that's kind of like probably a step or two away at the moment. Certainly in terms of being applicable for lots of applications because of the data transfer issues.
So James, in terms of cost, does the price of using cloud services, does that vary widely and does it fluctuate?
That's an excellent question. I mean, Amazon have been very good so far in terms of every price change they've made has been downwards. They've been steadily driving it cheaper as they've achieved scale. Our understanding is that Cloud Sigma's pricing is extremely competitive compared to Amazon's, which is certainly an impressive claim considering that Amazon is pretty huge compared to Cloud Sigma. Um, one thing that does need to be borne in mind is that it's important to compare apples with apples, and if we were to compare these two, for example, Amazon has got certain instance sizes where you choose a certain combination of CPU, RAM, and memory. Cloud Sigma, on the other hand, allow you to tailor your instances for your exact application, so you can choose your CPU, RAM, and memory. And so that basically means that when you're comparing the two, if you've optimized what you're doing with Cloud Sigma, when you compare that with Amazon, unless you're extremely lucky, you will have overbought two out of those three commodities. And so it is quite hard to be pricing apples with apples. But to be honest, we find that there are technical reasons at the moment why you would choose one cloud over another. And then once you've selected that partner or possibly partners, then it's a case of optimizing the costs in order to make access to that cloud as cheap as possible. At the moment, there isn't really a lot of switching, from one moment on one moment on another, purely driven by
Sure.
price.
And so, James, with these customers that are used to well, basically, we used to call it at Sun over provisioning, right? They buy at least 50% more than they think they might need just in case they wouldn't be brought to their knees. Uh, do you see people buying cloud now as a way to just buy a set amount of IT in-house and anything over would like kick over to Strategic Blue? Is that how the model would work?
So the big enterprises have often invested an awful lot of money in a tier three or tier four mission critical data center, but they tend to have a habit of chucking literally everything into it, and then when they run out of space, they then say, well, some of the stuff that we do is mission critical. We now need to build another mission critical data center. In actual fact, the sensible thing to do, and the difficulty here is in the practicalities, of course, but in an ideal world, you would be able to strip out all of those applications that could go into the cloud, set them up so that they can run in the cloud, and as and when your mission critical services basically push you over the edge in terms of what you're able to do internally, rather than bursting the mission critical ones, burst everything else onto the cloud in order to be able to manage that. Or if you don't want to be doing this on a dynamic basis, just make more space in your existing data center by choosing applications that you are happy to go on certain clouds, and just move them out and operate them there instead.
Sure. So, James, just as kind of a wrap-up question, What keeps you up at night? This seems to me like a pretty dynamic space.
What keeps me up at night, to be honest, is all of these predictions by the likes of Gartner that imply that I ought to have some really quite sizable revenues and a very large number of customers going through my books. And basically, the more customers that I get, the more I need to be able to finance them, and that requires going out and getting more money in terms of equity and debt. And it's kind of a almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
All right. Well, hey, I wish you the best with that. This sounds really exciting. And I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today. That's it for the Rich Report, folks. Stay tuned for more news and information on high performance computing.